and that should never have been the guidance. But why weren't these suits heard at the time? Because I know that they were brought. I forget.
Well, some places they were brought, some places they weren't brought. Courts found different excuses in the places where they didn't get involved. Pennsylvania is where it was heavily litigated. Wisconsin, less so. I mean, the problem was Mark Elias and his group was threatening and coercing people all across the country, getting secretaries of state panicked and doing secret settlements that changed the law in ways that it couldn't legally change. And a lot of the Trump administration, Trump campaign legal team, and the Republican National Committee legal team, a lot of them were asleep at the wheel, and some of them may have been complicit. So a lot of the lawyers involved have major conflicts. You have very few election lawyers out there that don't have conflicts, because most of them, if you're doing that on a regular basis, you're working for institutional actors most of the time. There's only a few of us that represent outsiders in election law, and that's only a few of us. So I think that's why that it didn't get. It should have been addressed. I thought it was. Found out it wasn't afterwards. We'll have someone on not this Wednesday sidebar, but next Wednesday sidebar. Patrick Witt, running for Congress right now in Georgia. He worked at the White House. He came down and volunteered time, so he was in the middle of everything that happened in Georgia. So he can tell us some of the stories about some of the craziness of what he got to witness, and how utterly unprepared so much of the Trump campaign legal team was, and how many of them were actually the key people undermining him throughout.
And Viva, in Wisconsin, we cannot vote by mail unless we are confined, not for COVID. I remember that at the time, where they had broadened the definition.
But they just ignored it. They just the state just ignored it, and the Mark Elias's crew was much more prepared, and they had all the election officials lined up in their pocket. And Zuckerberg, of course, was buying them off all across the country, $400 million or whatever it was he spent. And too many other people were asleep, and they weren't paying attention to what was happening.
And you know what the funny thing is, like, it's easy to pretend to be smart in hindsight. Although, Robert, I think you are always smart in hindsight and in foresight. I remember seeing it. We remember discussing at the time, why was there so much DNC party or DNC related parties litigation going on leading up in the 6 months before? And I remember we discussed it, and it's only in retrospect that it all makes sense now, is that they were suing preemptively, securing agreements, crafting legislation. It is exactly what the Time article described it as. The only issue is, you read the Time article magazine fortifying the 2020 elections. You read that article, and we all agree on the facts. We only say, does that article describe the application of democracy or the bastardization of democracy? That's the only question you have to ask. We can all agree on the facts. So,
well, they used COVID brilliantly as their perfect pretext for all of this. They were going to do it anyway, but they wouldn't have got away with it but for the panic response to the pandemic, which Trump partially, facilitated. I mean, it was partially on him for going along ultimately. So at key stages, that was the Babylon Bee headline. Trump supporters excited to back the guy who hired Anthony Fauci and locked down the first time. That some of that is on Trump. He was asleep at the wheel, and bad personnel choices that he kept making himself over and over and over.